How's it going? Necrotic Nick with Thralls of Metal, and we're going to do another What Got Us Into video. And since I'm the only fan of this style of music in the group, really, I get to do the one where what got me into Grindcore. Now, if you don't know, Grindcore is the ugly, violent, but somehow functional marriage between extreme metal and hardcore punk. Pretty much short songs, violent outbursts, guttural or screamed vocals. It's a lot of fun. It's probably, I would say, probably the most extreme subgenre in metal. In some faculties. I mean, black metal's pretty extreme too, yada yada yada, but if you just want the most violent outburst musically you can get in a short amount of time, Grindcore's your shit. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Number 1. Napalm Death. Fear, Emptiness, Despair. This originally came out in 1994, but I didn't hear it until 1995, courtesy of the Mortal Kombat soundtrack. That came out in 1995, and it pretty much bridged the gap between metal and industrial, or even, I guess, dance music. Featured KMFDM, but also Fear Factory, and lo and behold, there was one track on there by Napalm Death called Twist the Knife Slowly. And I got into it. It's the opening track on this album. And this was more in the realm of their kind of getting towards groove metal era, but it still had a sound that I couldn't quite place at that time. It really wasn't death metal, really wasn't like groove metal, and it had sort of a punk feel to it too. Lo and behold, I guess I was discovering Grindcore. And this may not be my favorite Napalm Death album, but it's still a really good jam, and it definitely got me into Grindcore. Brutal Truth, Sounds of the Animal Kingdom. This one, I have to be honest, I got it back in 97 or 98, and at that point I was more into groove metal and even nu metal. I got it because I like the cover. It's a pretty fucked up cover. Unfortunately, there's a sticker here. Well, let's get the full look. This is a wild and kind of disturbing cover. But I got it because, well, it didn't have the big, like, death metal logo on it or anything like that. And it looked like it could have been a nu metal band, so I picked it up on a whim. And man, was I shocked at what I bought, because this is some of the craziest music I had ever listened to at that point. Insane, spastic. The production was extra gritty on this. Definitely had a lot more of the punk feel than even Napalm Death, at least on that album. And it took me a while to get into this, but when I did, I found myself really appreciating, like, just how visceral it was. Like, I hadn't heard anything this hostile, and I've been listening to death metal at that point, but this was something totally different. So, it may not be my favorite Brutal Truth album, but this is still a great one, and I still jam it from time to time. Nasum, Inhale, Exhale. I got this because it was on Relapse Records, and that was the same one that Brutal Truth was on, so I gave it a whirl. So I gave it a whirl. And pretty much I knew what I was getting in terms of song length, because there are 38 tracks on this album. This one focused more on the punk and hardcore side, I thought. The songs were less spastic and all over the place as Brutal Truth, but they were still just nasty, heavy. The production was a little spotty on this one. I mean, it was their first album, but I really liked the fact that they really brought out the punk side of things. Like, it was very political natured, but it still kind of packed all that hostility you hear in death metal. I really dug it, and this was, believe it or not, more accessible than Brutal Truth. And I guess even Napalm Death at some point, to me, it just worked. But yeah, awesome. Inhale, Exhale. Definitely recommend this one. This is pretty much a Grindcore classic, in my opinion. Repulsion Horrified. This reissued on Relapse. I never had the original copy of this, but I remember hearing this on a buddy of mine's, like, mixed CDs or mixed tapes or whatever the fuck it was. And I like this one because it felt more thrashy, and I was already a big thrash fan at this point, like fucking loved Slayer, Sepultura, all that shit. And that appealed to me already, but it also had elements of death metal and, of course, that bit of punk. It wasn't as blast beat forward as, say, Nasum. It had more of like kind of like a fast Slayer like kind of blast, I guess. It wasn't the hyper blast or anything like that. It was just really focused, really fucking angry. 16 tracks in the album, so I knew I was getting short, violent songs. And it had a killer cover and a killer logo. I was like, all right, man. Even if it was death metal, I'd probably still enjoy it. And yeah, just got into it. Good stuff. Definitely check this one out. Terrorizer, World Downfall. I picked this up forever ago. This might actually be an original copy of the CD. I picked this up because I saw members of Napalm Death on here and 2 members of Morbid Angel who I already loved. So, alright, let's check this out. And this was kind of a bridging between death metal and grindcore for me. This wasn't straightforward grind necessarily. It had a lot of death metal elements, and Pete Sandoval fucking kills it on this album. This is probably one of my favorites in terms of death grind, which is its own subgenre. Maybe we'll get to that list later. But I just dug it. It was fiercely political, as most grindcore is, and it just sounded nasty as hell. And I like the fact that there were more death metal parts in there because I was already into that. So that definitely helped usher me in more into the grindcore side when I had more accessible bits that I already liked. So definitely recommend this one. Super awesome album. Disrupt, Unrest. This is their only full-length release, I believe. It originally came out in 1994. I didn't get it until much later. But this one got me also into crust punk too. This one had way more of the hardcore elements. Like, it was pretty much hardcore with the occasional blast beats and then guttural vocals. Like, there really isn't a lot of traditional metal on this, not a lot of death metal influence. Anything, it's very punk oriented, but it's way too heavy to just be considered hardcore. And like I said, I didn't know I discovered crust punk at this point, which is a close relative of grindcore. But I knew it was definitely more on the grindcore side of things, and I really got into that. It was just super heavy. I think everyone in this band contributed on vocals, and they were all just screams, guttural roars. Religion is Fraud, excellent track in here. Even includes a sample from The Exorcist, which I love horror movies, so that already worked. Definitely jam this one if you can find it. Exhumed, Gore metal. Once again, more on the death grind side, but it had enough grind elements that it once again got me further into grindcore. And this was pretty much early Carcass Worship, which they had elements of grind as well. I didn't get into them until a little bit later, though. I loved the fact that this was very gore-centric, and I already loved Cannibal Corpse, so that worked for me. And it had like a thrashy element to it that I really dug, but like I said, there was a lot of grind to this, and the fact that these songs were pretty damn short and just packed with absolute hostility. I absolutely loved it. Plus they had a sick logo, and when I was a kid, when I got this isn't the original one, I think. No, this might be the original one. I was a sucker for a cool logo and a cool cover, and well, I mean, you look at this cover and you know exactly what you're getting. Great album. Lockup, Pleasure's Pave Sewers. This was a super group that I discovered, and I got it simply because I saw who all was in it. You had Peter Tagren from Hypocrisy, who also did the production on this, Jesse Pintado and Shane Embry from Napalm Death, already loved them, and Nick Barker, who did drums for Cradle of Filth and Dimmu Borgir. So I was like, alright, this is a super group, let's see what they're all about, and it is straightforward death grind. Like, there's this is mostly focused on the grind, but there are definitely some elements of death on here too, which definitely helped me get into it as well. And just short, hyper, nasty songs. Really wicked drumming on this. Nick Barker kills it on this one. Peter Tagren's vocals, I was surprised that he really lended himself well to the grindcore sound. And it was pretty much born out of these guys getting together and talking about how they like to do some old school grindcore over a bunch of beers, and there you go. Really good album, solid gems. Might be my favorite one from them. They later had Thomas Lindbergh from At the Gates too. They've had a rotating membership of different people that are also in supergroups, but I think Shane Embry is probably the focal member in there. Great listen. Pig Destroyer, Prowler in the Yard. Holy fuck, this is one of the heaviest albums I ever listened to, and it's still up there. This band pretty much just said, fuck a bassist, we're just doing guitars, drums, and a screaming maniac of a vocalist. And when I heard these songs, like, it was just nasty as hell, but it was interesting because there were elements of like groovier stuff in here, like especially the song Maplethorpe Grey, which is one of my absolutely favorite tracks on here. It was surprisingly accessible on some level in terms of it was very riff based. Like, they gave you really good riffs, and Scott Hall is a fantastic guitarist. I just really got into this one, mainly because it was definitely grind, but it didn't sound like any grindcore band I had heard at this point. And it wasn't just due to the absence of the bassist. It was really visceral, really stripped down and nasty. It sounded like it was jammed right in the studio, and they just had these violent outbursts. Like, this is definitely catharsis in music, I think. Like, man, there's some fucked up shit on this, but I absolutely love this album. This is way up there on my list of grindcore albums still. And finally, this is a more recent one that I got into. Well, more recent in terms of this timeline. It was Gadget Remote. This is a Swedish band, I believe, and we are listening to them right now. Granted, it's a different album. And these guys actually brought some cool elements of atmosphere to grind, which I thought was kind of interesting. Like, there's, I don't know if you want to call them melodic moments, but definitely more atmospheric moments, like just a little bit of ambience, and then of course they just pummel you with short blasting heavy songs. It's a really great listen. Definitely recommend it. And most of the stuff comes off of Relapse, and I got into Relapse samplers when I was a kid, and they always had some cool shit. Fantastic listen. Definitely check these guys out. They recently resurfaced. This new album I'm jamming is fantastic from start to finish. A welcome return. But still jam this one too. Remote. Really good. And yeah, that pretty much does it for the albums that got me into grindcore. If there are any albums that I missed or that you'd like to bring up in the comments, I'd love to talk about them with you. And of course, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you later.